Hey there, boxing fans. Today, we're stepping into the ring, to tackle a legend that's been debated for decades. Did Willie Pep, the Will of the Wisp, really win an entire round without throwing a single punch?
It's a story that perfectly captures the magic of boxing, how a single moment can become larger than life.
We're going deep into the sources you provided. An article analyzing this legendary fight, and honestly, I'm already hooked. Just imagine the scene. It's either 1945 or 46. Sources can't even agree on the year. At the Minneapolis Auditorium, Willie Pep, a two-time featherweight champ known for his defensive wizardry, is facing off against Jackie Graves.
Pep wasn't a knockout artist. He was all about finesse and outsmarting his opponent.
And that's where this wild story comes in. The legend says Pep told sports writers he'd win the third round without throwing a single punch. Then he supposedly danced around Graves, dodging and weaving like a phantom so effectively that the judges gave him the round. I mean, is that even possible?
It sounds almost superhuman, right? But that's what makes it so compelling. To understand this, we need to dig into the context of boxing in that era.
All right, let's unpack that. What was different back then?
Well, think about boxing reporting in the 1940s. It wasn't exactly known for its accuracy. Even basic facts like the number of knockdowns in a fight could be disputed. So separating fact from fiction in this case is tricky.
So, are we saying the sports writers might have embellished a bit?
It's certainly a possibility, but it's also important to remember that Pep himself loved this story. He reportedly carried a newspaper clipping about it and would proudly show it off.
Wait, so he was playing into the myth. Why would he do that?
This is where it gets interesting. It wasn't just a random anecdote for Pep. It was a core part of his identity as a boxer. It amplified his reputation for defensive genius. And in a sport where image is everything that's valuable.
So even if it wasn't entirely true, it helped solidify his legacy. But let's talk evidence. The article mentions a sports writer named Don Riley as a key source.
Riley claimed to have been there witnessing Pep proposes as a demonstration of his defensive skills. He's really the primary source for the punchless round story as we know it.
But if Riley's account is all we have to go on, how reliable is it? Didn't the article also point out some holes in the story?
Absolutely. There are other contemporary accounts that contradict Riley's version. Some reports describe the third round as a fairly even exchange, with plenty of punches thrown. And this isn't just some random disagreement. These conflicting reports came from other respected sports writers.
So we've got a real he said, she said situation on our hands. But wait, it gets even more complicated, right? Didn't Pep himself admit to throwing punches in that round?
He did. In a later interview, Pep confessed to throwing a few jabs during that round. And to add to the intrigue, Jackie Graves, Pep's opponent, had no recollection of anything unusual happening. When asked about the punchless round, years later, he apparently joked about why Pep didn't just win the whole fight that way, if he was so good at avoiding punches.
Wow, so even the people involved seem to contradict the legend. But that makes me wonder if we're talking about jabs. Could this whole thing be a misunderstanding? What if Pep meant he won the round without landing a powerful punch?
That's one of the alternative explanations the article proposes, and it's an intriguing one. There's a subtle but important difference between throwing a punch and landing a punch, especially in a sport as fast-paced as boxing.
I can see that. A jab could be used more for distraction or keeping your opponent at bay, not necessarily to inflict damage. Maybe Pep was scoring points with those jabs, but not actually trying to connect forcefully.
Exactly. And remember, we're talking about an era before instant replays and multiple camera angles. What one observer saw as a punch thrown might have been perceived differently by someone else.
This whole thing makes me think about how much the way we remember events can be shaped by the stories we hear, even if they're not entirely accurate.
It's a great point. This story has been repeated so often that it's taken on a life of its own, almost becoming a folktale in the world of boxing. And, it wouldn't be the first time a sports legend has been embellished over time.
Right. It makes me think about all those incredible stories you hear about athletes, those superhuman feats that seem almost impossible. It makes you wonder how much is real and how much is myth-making.
Absolutely. And in boxing, that line between reality and myth is often blurred. Think about the legendary rivalries come from behind victories, the trash talk. These narratives add to the drama and excitement of the sport.
So even if Pep didn't literally win a round without throwing a punch, this story still captures something essential about his style, right?
Precisely. It embodies his elusiveness, his ability to outthink and outmaneuver his opponent. Even if the specifics are murky, the legend speaks volumes about Pep's defensive brilliance.
The article also throws out some other interesting possibilities. One is that maybe this happened in a different fight altogether. Pep fought a lot in Minneapolis around that time, so maybe the details got mixed up over the years.
Memory is a fascinating and sometimes unreliable thing.
No.
It's certainly plausible that details from different fights could have been conflated, leading to this composite story.
And then there's the theory, and I kind of hate to say this, that Pep and Riley might have just made the whole thing up.
It's not beyond the realm of possibility. Both men had something to gain from this story. Pep's legacy was enhanced, and Riley got to be the chronicler of this incredible feat. We have to remember that storytelling was a big part of boxing back then.
It's amazing how much this one story raises questions about history of memory and how legends are created. But beyond the debate over its authenticity, I'm curious. What do you think this story tells us about Pep, about boxing, about the way we construct narratives?
That's the heart of it, isn't it? The story has endured because it tacks into something deeper. Whether it's fact or fiction, it captures the essence of Pep's style and the enduring appeal of boxing mythology.
It's a good reminder that sometimes the stories we tell ourselves are just as powerful as the facts, maybe even more so.
And that those stories can have real-world consequences. The article mentions that this legend may have helped Pep in his later years when he faced financial difficulties. It kept his name in the spotlight, leading to more appearances and opportunities.
That's incredible. It suggests the legend, even if not entirely true, had a tangible impact on his life.
Exactly. It became part of his brand, a symbol of his unique skill set, and it helped him navigate a challenging period. But even beyond the practical benefits, I think it speaks to the power of storytelling in sports. Fans crave these larger-than-life narratives, and sometimes a bit of embellishment goes a long way.
Okay, so after diving into the evidence and exploring all these theories, what's your final verdict? Do you think Willie Pep actually won a round without throwing a single punch?
Well, it's important to consider the context. Boxing scoring in the 1940s was subjective. Judges looked at ring generalship, aggression, and defense. It wasn't just about connecting punches.
So theoretically, a fighter could win a round by being incredibly elusive and frustrating their opponent, even without landing many blows.
Exactly. And if any boxer could pull that off, it would be Willie Pep. His footwork was legendary. He could make opponents miss entirely, tiring them out. Now, a truly punchless round, as the legend describes it, is probably a bit of a stretch.
But you're saying it's not entirely impossible, especially given the scoring criteria and Pep's unique style. I have to admit I'm starting to see how this myth took hold.
It's a testament to his skill. Even if the story isn't entirely accurate, it captures the essence of his genius. It makes you believe that maybe, just maybe, he could defy the odds and achieve something seemingly impossible.
It's a great reminder that sometimes the most captivating stories aren't always about literal truth, but about the larger truths they represent. It's like that saying, never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
Exactly. And in this case, the story itself reveals the truth about Willie Pep's incredible defensive abilities.
I think what's so fascinating about this whole punchless round debate is that it forces us to think about the very essence of boxing. Is it purely about brute force, or is there a higher level of strategy and skill involved?
That's a great question. And Pep's story, whether completely true or not, highlights the often overlooked aspect of defensive mastery in boxing. It's not just about throwing punches. It's about avoiding them, controlling the pace, and outsmarting your opponent.
Which makes me think, do you think a truly punchless round could ever happen in modern boxing?
It's a tough one. Scoring has evolved. There's more emphasis on power punches now. And with instant replays, judges are less likely to be swayed by pure defensive maneuvering.
But you're not ruling it out entirely.
Well, never say never. Imagine a fighter with Pep's elusiveness combined with the strategic use of clinching and feints to control the ring and rack up points. It would be a rare sight, but I wouldn't say it's impossible.
That's what I love about this story. It leaves us with more questions than answers. It sparks the imagination and makes you wonder what's really possible in the sport.
And it challenges us to think critically about the information we encounter, to question assumptions, and to appreciate the nuances of history and memory.
You know, after going through all this, I'm starting to think the most important takeaway isn't whether the punchless round actually happened, but the way it reflects the power of storytelling in shaping our perception of sports legends.
I completely agree. It's a reminder that even in the pursuit of objective truth, there's always room for a bit of mystery and wonder. And in a sport like boxing, where the line between reality and myth can be blurry, those stories often become more powerful than the facts themselves.
Well said. This has been such a mind-bending deep dive. We started with a simple question: did Willie Pep win a round without throwing a punch?
Yeah.
And we ended up exploring everything from boxing history to the psychology of memory to the role of myth-making in sports.
It's a testament to how a single, seemingly insignificant event can unlock a much larger and more fascinating conversation.
And I think it leaves us with one final provocative thought for you, dear listener. Do you think it's possible to win a boxing round without throwing a single punch? What would that even look like?
It's a question that forces us to consider the very definition of boxing, the balance between offense and defense, and the role of strategy and cunning.
Food for thought indeed. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the legend of Willie Pep's punchless round. Until next time, keep those jabs coming. Or not.